Chapter 14. Please give her back. Reluctantly, Christy let me lead her down the path to the bench under the dogwood tree. When Louisa saw us coming, she stood up slowly. "Who have you brought with you?" She peered into the shadows behind me. "Is it Carrie?" "No, it's my neighbor, Christy." I beckoned to Christy, but she hung back, her eyes fixed on Louisa, as if she expected her to change into something hideous at any moment. Louisa smiled and extended a small hand, but Christy wouldn't take it. I knew she was as scared as I'd been the first time I met Louisa. "You needn't be afraid," Louisa said to her. "I'm not." Christy frowned and folded her arms tightly across her chest, refusing to come close enough for Louisa to touch her. Louisa turned to me. "Did you find Carrie?" I nodded. What would Louisa think if she could see the mean old woman Carrie had grown into? But she wouldn't give me Anna Maria. Louisa sighed. "I didn't think she really would. No matter what Snowball and I do, she won't part with my doll." "Do you ever see Carrie?" I asked. "Sometimes." Louisa gazed across the hedge at my house. "There she is right now." She pointed at my bedroom window. "I often see her watching me." With shivers running up my neck, I turned and saw a girl standing at my window. Her hair was long and dark, but she had her back to the light, making it impossible for me to see her face. When she realized we'd noticed her, she stepped away from the window and closed the curtains. It made goosebumps rise all over me to think I was looking at my own bedroom, not as it was now, but as it used to be. How could a house exist in two different times at once? If Carrie was in my room, where was Mom? Anxiously, I turned back to Louisa, but she was rocking her doll carriage and humming. "Would you like to play tea party again?" she asked me. "I brought 3 dolls today, just in case Carrie came, so Christy can have Beulah." Reaching into the carriage, Louisa pulled out a china doll with painted hair and handed her to Christy. She gave me Elfrida again and kept Marguerite for herself. Silently, Christy watched Louisa pour imaginary tea into 3 tiny cups. In the few days I'd known her, she'd never been so quiet, and I wondered what she was thinking about. As we pretended to sip our tea, Christy finally spoke. "Why did Carrie take your doll?" Her face was screwed into a terrible scowl. If she had the chance, I was sure she'd beat up Carrie for making Louisa so unhappy. Louisa glanced up at my bedroom window as if she expected Carrie to reappear. "Well, you see, Carrie's father never let her have a doll of her own," she said. "He thinks toys encourage idleness." She gave Marguerite a little pat on the head. "Whenever Carrie came to see me," Louisa went on, "I let her play with Anna Maria because she loved her best. A few days ago, I left Anna Maria in the garden while I ate dinner. When I went outside to get her, I saw Carrie running through the hedge with her. I called and called, but she never came back." As Louisa's eyes filled with tears, Christy and I looked at each other. How could Miss Cooper have changed so little? Even now, she was as mean and rotten as she'd been when she was a kid. "We'll get her for you," I told Louisa. "I promise." Louisa began to cough again, harder this time. "Maybe you should go inside," I told her, frightened by the way her body shook. She was so thin and small and fragile. "Yes," she said, letting me lead her toward her house. "I'm not supposed to stay outside, but I wanted to be here if you came back to play." As we walked up the path, I saw Aunt Viola hurrying toward us. To my surprise, she brushed past Christy and me without seeing us and picked up Louisa as if she weighed no more than Anna Maria. "I thought you were in your room," she said, as she carried her up the porch steps. "My doll carriage," Louisa gasped between coughs. "I left it in the garden." "I'll bring it in later, after you're in bed." Aunt Viola opened the door, and Christy and I watched her carry Louisa into the house. Then the door shut, and they were gone. Alone in the dusk, Christy and I stared at each other. "Why didn't Aunt Viola see us?" Christy asked. "I told you before," I said. "We're the ghosts here." "But Louisa sees us," Christy said. "Maybe it's because Snowball brings us to her." I looked down at the cat, and he looked at me. Then he walked away toward the hedge. By the light of the moon, I saw his shadow, but when I looked at Christy, I realized she had no shadow, and neither did I. "Come on, Christy," I said. "It's time to go back." Taking her hand, I followed Snowball through the hedge. As we stumbled into my yard, the world spun like a carousel. With the sun in my eyes almost blinding me, I heard Mom's typewriter, Max barking, a motorcycle sweeping past, and Mrs. Smith's vacuum cleaner. The steps to our apartment cast a sharp shadow on the side of the house, and the leaves rustled in Christy's tree. Feeling a little weak and wobbly, I sank down on the grass beside Christy. "Well," I asked her, "do you believe me now?" For a few seconds, Christy just sat there. She was breathing fast, and she was almost as pale as Louisa. "Oh, Ashley," she whispered, "it was all true what you said. I didn't think it would be." Then, turning her head, Christy looked back through the hedge. "It's just a field again," she said. I nodded. "See the big thicket of pokeberries under the elm tree? That's where the house used to be. The foundation's still there." "I wonder what happened to the house and to Louisa." Christy stared at me. "She's sick, isn't she?" "She told me she has consumption." "Is that a bad disease? Is it contagious?" "It was then," I said, "when Louisa was little." "But there's a cure, right?" "Now there is." "But back in those days?" Christy asked. "People didn't die of consumption, did they?" "Don't worry about it, Christy," I said. "What we have to do is get Anna Maria away from Miss Cooper." Christy sighed and hid her face in her hands. "I wish I hadn't told. I'd give anything to go back to yesterday and make it different." "It's too late to change it now." I stood up and brushed the dirt off the seat of my shorts. "But maybe we can try." "Where are you going?" Christy asked. "To see Miss Cooper." "It won't do any good. You'll just get in trouble again," Christy said, but I didn't pay any attention to her. I was still afraid Miss Cooper might evict Mom and me, but I had to get Anna Maria. I'd keep my promise to Louisa no matter what happened. Summoning all the courage I had, I marched around the corner of the house and found Miss Cooper sitting on her front porch, reading the newspaper. When she saw Christy and me, she frowned. Grabbing her cane, she levered herself out of her rocking chair. "You girls get out of here," she said. "You've got no business in this part of the yard." Christy started edging away toward the safety of her treehouse, but I stood my ground. "Miss Cooper," I said, "please give Anna Maria back to me. I have to have her." Miss Cooper clutched her cane tightly, and for a few seconds we stood still, eye to eye. Finally, she swallowed hard and said, Yesterday you spoke a lot of nonsense about Louisa. Her voice trembled. How did you know her name? There was a note in the box you buried. It said, Louisa Perkins, please forgive me. I am sorry. Your friend Carrie. I held my breath and waited for Miss Cooper to say something. When she didn't, I added, That's how I know you're Carrie. Louisa, she said slowly, and her mouth worked around the name as if she hadn't spoken it for a very long time. Yes, I forgot about the note. Turning away from me, Miss Cooper gazed across her lawn at the field where Louisa's house had once stood. Louisa Perkins, the old woman murmured, as if she'd forgotten my existence. She lived next door, but the house is gone now. It burned down about 20 years ago. What happened to Louisa? I asked. Oh, Miss Cooper said. She died when she was 8 or 9. The words fell from her lips like stones, and it took me a second or two to realize what she'd said. I clutched Christy's arm, but we didn't look at each other. We just stood there on the lawn while the birds sang around us, as if nothing had happened. Miss Cooper picked up her newspaper and fanned herself with it. Children died all the time in those days, she muttered. I stared at Miss Cooper's wrinkled face and red-rimmed eyes. Here she was, an old woman, talking about Louisa's short life as if it hadn't mattered at all. Didn't she feel bad about living so much longer? Then Christy's voice cut through the hot summer air. Louisa wants her doll, she said, and you better give it to her. The old woman looked at us then. Go on home, she said, her voice rising. Both of you. She yanked open the door, but before she went into the house, she added, I don't know what you're up to, but don't come pestering me again about that doll. I ran up the porch steps after her and rapped on the long window beside the closed door. Give me the doll, I cried. She doesn't belong to you. The house was silent. Pressing my face against the glass, I tried to see inside, but the lace curtains stretched over the window blocked my view. Angrily, I pushed the doorbell and let it ring till it sounded like someone screaming. Give me Anna Maria, I yelled. Give her to me. I kicked the door hard, and then, frightened, I turned and ran. With Christy behind me, I scrambled up the ladder to the treehouse. End of chapter 14.